Welcome to Cafe Stories. I'm your host, Alfie. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. Drop your location in the comments below. Today's mystery, The Candyman's Curse, a new Sherlock Holmes adventure where children vanish after accepting sweets from a stranger. Without further ado, let's get into it. Sherlock Holmes and the Candyman's Curse. Chapter 1. A Most Disturbing Pattern. It was in the latter part of October, when the autumn winds had stripped the trees of their summer finery, and the gas lamps of Baker Street gleamed dully through the swirling fog, that I found myself once more in the familiar sitting-room of my old friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The inclement weather had aggravated the wound in my leg, a souvenir of my military service in Afghanistan, and I had been somewhat neglectful of our friendship in recent weeks. My medical practice had kept me occupied, but I confess that I had begun to miss the singular excitement that accompanied my association with the world's only consulting detective. I found Holmes in his armchair by the fire, surrounded by a litter of newspapers. His tall, lean figure was hunched forward, his hawk-like features illuminated by the dancing flames as he studied the pages with intense concentration. So absorbed was he in his examination that he did not immediately register my presence. "You are preoccupied, Holmes," I remarked, settling into the chair opposite him. "What engages your attention so completely?" Holmes looked up, his keen grey eyes focusing on me as if emerging from a trance. "Ah, Watson, I was beginning to think your practice had entirely claimed you. You're looking well, though your limp is more pronounced, no doubt due to the damp weather we've been experiencing." I smiled at his customary deduction. "Indeed, but you have not answered my question." "I am studying a most disturbing pattern," he replied, gesturing to the newspapers strewn about him. "Over the past 6 weeks, 5 children have vanished from various parts of London. The police, as usual, are treating them as separate incidents, but I perceive a connection that has thus far eluded them." He handed me several clippings, each describing the disappearance of a child. I scanned them quickly, my medical instincts immediately concerned for the welfare of the young victims. "What connection do you see, Holmes?" I inquired, failing to perceive any obvious link between the cases. Holmes leaned back, steepling his long fingers beneath his chin. "Observe, Watson. Each child was last seen accepting sweets from a stranger. In each case, the child was momentarily unsupervised in a public place, a park, outside a school, or near their home, and each child was between the ages of 7 and 10 from respectable middle-class families." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "You believe these children have been targeted deliberately?" "I am certain of it," Holmes replied, gravely. "Note the methodical nature of the disappearances. 1 child every 9 days, each from a different district of London, yet following a discernible pattern of movement from east to west." "Have you informed Scotland Yard of your suspicions?" Holmes's thin lips quirked into a sardonic smile. "I have sent Inspector Lestrade several notes, but he seems determined to treat these as random occurrences. He suggests that children are prone to wandering off and that they will likely return home or be found unharmed." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson knocked at the door, announcing the arrival of Inspector Lestrade himself. The inspector entered, his ferret-like face drawn with concern. "Mr. Holmes," he said, removing his bowler hat. "Dr. Watson, I'm afraid I must retract my previous assessment. There has been another disappearance, a young girl named Emily Thornfield, aged 8. She was last seen yesterday afternoon in Regent's Park." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a mixture of vindication and concern. "And let me guess, Inspector, she was last seen accepting sweets from a stranger?" Lestrade's expression registered surprise. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes. How did you know?" "Because it is the same in every case," Holmes replied, springing to his feet with sudden energy. We are dealing with a most methodical and dangerous individual, whom I have taken to calling the Candyman, a figure who entices children with sweets before spiriting them away. But what could be the motive? I asked, horrified at the implications. That, my dear Watson, is what we must discover, Holmes replied, reaching for his pipe. The newspapers have thus far failed to connect these cases, which suggests our culprit is clever enough to vary his methods just enough to avoid drawing attention to the pattern. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Holmes, I must admit that I was wrong to dismiss your earlier communications. Will you help us? Holmes filled his pipe with tobacco from the Persian slipper he kept by the fireplace. Inspector, I have already begun. Watson, if you would be so good as to accompany me, I believe we should visit the homes of these children and speak with their parents. There may be additional connections that are not apparent from these sparse newspaper accounts. Of course, Holmes, I replied, already reaching for my hat and coat. One more thing, Inspector, Holmes said, his voice suddenly sharp. Has there been any form of ransom demand, any communication from the abductor? None whatsoever, Lestrade replied. That's what makes these cases so baffling. It's as if the children have simply vanished into thin air. Holmes's eyes narrowed. No, Inspector. They have been taken by someone with a purpose, someone methodical and patient. And I fear that unless we act quickly, we may expect more children to disappear. As we departed Baker Street into the foggy London afternoon, I could not help but feel a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Holmes strode ahead, his tall figure cutting through the mist like the prow of a ship, his mind already grappling with the sinister puzzle before us. Come, Watson, he called over his shoulder. There is not a moment to lose. The game is afoot, and innocent lives hang in the balance. Chapter 2. The Vanished Children. The hansom cab rattled through the fog-shrouded streets of London, carrying Holmes and myself toward the home of the Thornfields in Marylebone. Holmes sat in silence, his keen eyes fixed upon the passing streets, his mind clearly engaged with the problem before us. I had learned through long experience that it was best not to disturb his thoughts at such times, and so I contented myself with watching the rain-slicked cobblestones pass beneath our wheels. You know, Watson, Holmes said suddenly, breaking his reverie, what strikes me as most peculiar about these abductions is the selection of the victims. These are not children of the aristocracy who might be held for ransom, nor are they the unfortunate waifs of the East End who might vanish without causing much stir. No, these are children of the respectable middle class, the backbone of our society. Perhaps the kidnapper seeks to cause maximum distress, I suggested. Such disappearances would certainly provoke public outcry. Perhaps, Holmes replied, tapping his fingertips together. And yet there has been no public statement, no manifesto claiming responsibility. The newspapers have reported each case in isolation, relegating them to inside pages rather than headlines. It is almost as if our culprit wishes to remain anonymous while executing a very specific design. The cab drew up before a modest townhouse with drawn curtains. A constable stood at the door, his face solemn, as we approached. Mr. Holmes, he said, recognizing my companion, Inspector Lestrade sent word you might be coming. The family is most distraught. Understandably so, Holmes replied. We shall endeavour to be brief and considerate. We were ushered into a sitting room where a woman sat stiffly on a settee, her face pale and drawn, her husband standing by the window, his back to us. A palpable grief hung in the air like a shroud. Mrs. Thornfield, Holmes said gently, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are here to help find your daughter. The woman's eyes, red-rimmed from weeping, flickered with a momentary hope. Can you bring her back to us, Mr. Holmes? My Emily, she is only 8 years old." "I shall do everything in my power," Holmes assured her. "But I must ask you some questions. Can you tell me precisely what happened yesterday afternoon?" Mrs. Thornfield dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Emily and I were in Regent's Park. She was feeding the ducks while I sat on a bench nearby. I looked away for only a moment, no more than a minute, to speak with an acquaintance. When I turned back, she was gone." "And did you see anyone approach her?" Holmes inquired. "No, but another child, a boy playing nearby, said he saw Emily speaking with a tall man who offered her a sweet. He said she seemed pleased, not frightened." Holmes nodded. "And has Emily any particular fondness for sweets?" "She loves them," Mr. Thornfield said, turning from the window, "always begging for a penny for the sweet shop." "May I see her room?" Holmes asked. The parents exchanged a glance of surprise, but Mr. Thornfield led us upstairs to a small, tidy bedroom. Holmes examined everything minutely, from the arrangement of dolls on the shelf to the contents of the waste-paper basket. He spent several minutes on his hands and knees, examining the floorboards with his magnifying glass before rising with a slight nod of satisfaction. "There are traces of an unusual sugar compound here," he murmured to me. "The same as I found in the newspaper accounts of the other scenes." After making a few more inquiries and offering words of reassurance to the stricken parents, we took our leave and proceeded to visit the homes of 3 other victims: the Parkers, whose son Thomas had vanished from outside his school; the Wilsons, whose daughter Jane had disappeared from a church fete; and the Abbotts, whose son William had been taken while playing in his own garden. In each household we encountered the same devastating grief, the same pattern of momentary inattention followed by inexplicable disappearance, and in each case Holmes discovered minute traces of the same sugar compound. At the Abbotts' home, a particularly affecting scene unfolded as Mrs. Abbott, a woman of remarkable composure despite her ordeal, showed us a small wooden toy that her son had left behind. "William would never have left this voluntarily," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "It was his favorite possession." "And did he mention anything unusual before his disappearance?" Holmes inquired. Mrs. Abbott hesitated. "He did say something the day before he vanished. He mentioned the nice candy man who had spoken to him in the park. I thought nothing of it at the time, assumed it was one of the vendors. But now—" Holmes's eyes flashed with interest. "Those were his exact words? The nice candy man?" "Yes," she replied. "I scolded him for speaking to strangers, but he insisted the man was kind and had given him a special sweet that tasted like nothing he'd had before." Outside, as we walked toward the main road to find another cab, Holmes was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking, Holmes?" I asked. "I am thinking, Watson, that we are dealing with someone who understands children, someone who knows precisely how to earn their trust. And I am thinking that the sugar compound I have found is quite distinctive. I need to conduct some experiments." As we climbed into the cab, Holmes gave the driver an address in the East End. "We're not returning to Baker Street?" I asked. "Not yet," Holmes replied. "First, we must visit London's confectionery district. I believe the answer to our mystery may lie in the most innocent of places, the sweet shops of our city." The cab pulled away from the curb, and I caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the shadows across the street, watching us depart. When I turned to look more closely, the figure had vanished, leaving me with a distinct sense of unease as we rumbled through the gathering darkness of late afternoon. Chapter 3. The Sugar Trail. The cab deposited us at the corner of a narrow street in one of the older quarters of London, where the smell of caramelized sugar hung in the air like an invisible fog. The confectionery district had been established here for generations, its sweet aroma creating a strange contrast with the otherwise dreary surroundings. Gas lamps were being lit as the early winter dusk descended, casting pools of yellowed light upon the wet cobblestones. "This area, Watson," said Holmes as we walked along the street, "has been the centre of London's sweet-making trade since the time of the Stuarts. Some of these establishments can trace their lineages back 2 centuries or more." I looked about at the various shop fronts, most now closed for the evening, their windows displaying artful arrangements of boiled sweets, chocolates, and toffees. "What are we looking for exactly?" I inquired, struggling to match my companion's long strides. "I collected samples of the sugar compound from each of the children's homes," Holmes replied, patting his waistcoat pocket where I knew he kept small glass vials for such specimens. "It is a most unusual substance, not your common sugar, nor even the more exotic varieties imported from the colonies. No, it has a distinctive crystalline structure and chemical signature that I believe may be unique to a specific confectioner." We paused before a shop with the name Grimshaw and Sons painted in gold lettering above the door. Unlike the other establishments, a light still burned within. "Ah, excellent," said Holmes. "Old Mr. Grimshaw is still at his accounts. He is something of an authority on the confectionery trade in London, and may provide us with the information we seek." The bell above the door jingled merrily as we entered. Behind the counter stood a stooped man with spectacles perched upon his nose, his hair white as the sugar he sold. He looked up at our entrance with mild surprise. "We are closed for the day, gentlemen," he began, but Holmes interrupted with a courteous bow. "Mr. Grimshaw, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are not here to purchase sweets, but rather to solicit your expert knowledge on a matter of some importance." The old man's expression changed to one of curiosity. "Sherlock Holmes, the detective? Well, this is most unusual. How may I be of service?" Holmes produced a small vial containing white crystals from his pocket. "I wonder if you might identify this substance for me. It appears to be a form of sugar, but one with which I am not familiar." Mr. Grimshaw took the vial, opened it carefully, and examined the contents with the practised eye of a craftsman. He touched a tiny amount to his tongue and then froze, his eyes widening slightly. "This is most unusual indeed, Mr. Holmes," he said slowly. "This is what we in the trade call phantom sugar, a specially formulated confection that dissolves almost instantly on the tongue, leaving a flavour that seems to change and develop over time. It is exceedingly difficult to produce and requires not only skill but specialized equipment." "And who in London possesses such skill and equipment?" Holmes asked, his eyes gleaming with interest. The old man frowned. "Very few, sir. In my day there was only one man who truly mastered the art, Edmund Sweetwater. He had premises in Covent Garden, a most impressive operation, but that was before—" "Before what, Mr. Grimshaw?" I prompted as the confectioner hesitated. "Before the scandal, sir," he replied in a lower voice. 3 years ago there was an incident. Several children became ill after consuming Sweetwater's confections. There were accusations of tainted ingredients, arsenic, some said, though it was never proven conclusively. But the damage was done, his reputation was ruined, and he lost everything: his business, his home, his standing in the community." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I knew him well enough to recognize the intense focus in his grey eyes. "And what became of this Mr. Sweetwater?" "No one knows for certain," Grimshaw replied with a shake of his head. "He disappeared from London society. Some said he left for the continent, others that he had taken his own life in despair. The premises were sold to satisfy his creditors." "Most interesting," Holmes murmured. "Would you happen to know who led the accusations against him?" "It was a group of parents, sir, respectable folk, whose children had fallen ill. They formed a committee and were most vocal in the press and at the public health inquiry. I believe a physician named Dr. Carmichael was particularly prominent in the proceedings. Holmes thanked the old confectioner for his assistance, and we took our leave. Outside, the fog had thickened, and the street lamps created halos in the murky air. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I asked, as we walked briskly away from the shop. "It is a significant development, Watson. We now have a potential connection, a confectioner with a specialized skill who suffered ruin at the hands of concerned parents. It may be mere coincidence, but it warrants further investigation." We had proceeded about 100 yards when Holmes suddenly gripped my arm and pulled me into the recessed doorway of a closed tobacco shop. "Quiet, Watson," he whispered. "We are being followed." I peered cautiously from our hiding place. At first I could see nothing through the fog, but then a figure emerged, a tall, thin man in a greatcoat and top hat. He paused, looking about as if searching for something, then continued past our hiding place. "Who is he?" I whispered. "I cannot say with certainty," Holmes replied quietly, "but I observed him earlier today near the Abbott residence. It seems our inquiries have attracted attention." Once the figure had disappeared into the fog, we emerged from our hiding place and hailed a cab to return to Baker Street. During the journey, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in his characteristic pose of deep thought. Back at our lodgings, Holmes immediately set to work at his chemical table, subjecting the sugar samples to various tests. The room soon filled with acrid fumes and the clink of glass apparatus. "Watson," he said at length, looking up from his microscope, "this substance contains traces of a rare South American herb that produces a mild euphoric sensation, not dangerous in small doses, but certainly unusual in confectionery. It would create a distinctly unique flavor that a child would find entrancing." "Could it be used to render a child compliant?" I asked, with growing alarm. "Precisely my thought," Holmes replied grimly. "Our Candyman is not merely offering sweets. He is employing a sophisticated lure that few children could resist." As Holmes returned to his experiments, I could not help but feel a chill of apprehension. Somewhere in London, 5 children were being held by a figure with both the knowledge and the motive to orchestrate such a disturbing scheme. And as the clock on the mantelpiece chimed midnight, I wondered if another child would soon join their number. Chapter 4. A Warning Delivered. I awoke the following morning to find Holmes already dressed and pacing the sitting room, a telegram in his hand and a troubled expression upon his aquiline features. The chemical apparatus from the previous night had been cleared away, but the acrid smell of his experiments lingered in the air. "You have been up all night," I observed, noting the dark circles beneath his eyes. "The problem demanded it, Watson," he replied, handing me the telegram. "This arrived from Lestrade an hour ago. There has been another disappearance, a boy of 8, taken from Kensington Gardens yesterday afternoon." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed, scanning the brief message. "That's 6 children now." "Yes, and our culprit is accelerating his timetable. Previously he took a child every 9 days. This one was taken after only 6. Holmes resumed his pacing, hands clasped behind his back. "He knows we are pursuing him, Watson. He is responding to the pressure. Surely that's good. If he's becoming hurried, he may make mistakes." Holmes shook his head gravely. "Or he may become more dangerous. A cornered fox is never more deadly than when the hounds are closing in." Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post and a tray of breakfast, which Holmes waved away impatiently. Among the correspondence was a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This came by special messenger, Mr. Holmes," Mrs. Hudson said. "The boy said it was most urgent." Holmes examined the package without touching it. No address. Hand-delivered, roughly 4 inches square and half an inch thick. Posted in East London, judging by the particular clay on the wrapper. With his penknife, Holmes carefully cut the string and unfolded the brown paper to reveal a small cardboard box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single sweet, wrapped in distinctive green and gold paper, alongside a folded note. "Do not touch it with your bare hands, Watson," Holmes warned, using a pair of tweezers to lift the sweet. He sniffed it carefully. As I suspected, the same compound we found traces of at the children's homes. He unfolded the note with the same tweezers and read aloud, "Mr. Holmes, your interference is unwelcome. The children are mine by right. For every step you take toward me, another child will vanish. This sweet is a reminder of promises broken and justice denied. Step back, or bear the weight of more disappearances upon your conscience." The note was unsigned, the handwriting a meticulous, flowing script that spoke of education and refinement. "Good Lord, Holmes," I said, "he's threatening to take more children if you continue the investigation." "So it would seem," Holmes replied, studying the note through his magnifying glass. "The paper is expensive, though not ostentatious. The ink is a particular shade of blue-black, favoured by professional clerks and bookkeepers, and observe the distinctive loop on the lowercase g and the sharp angle of the T. Our writer is right-handed, but was perhaps trained by a left-handed teacher." He moved to the sweet next, examining the wrapper. "This packaging is custom-made, not mass-produced. The design is reminiscent of Sweetwater's confectionery, according to my research last night, but with subtle differences. Our man has created his own variation on the theme." "What will you do, Holmes? Surely you cannot abandon these children regardless of the threat." "Abandon them?" "Never," Holmes replied, his grey eyes flashing with determination. "But I shall be more cautious in my inquiries. This note confirms we are on the right track, and our quarry is growing nervous." Holmes placed the note and sweet into separate envelopes, which he carefully labelled before storing them in his desk drawer. "I need you to visit the British Library this morning, Watson," he said. "Research everything you can find about the Sweetwater scandal from 3 years ago, newspaper accounts, medical reports, court proceedings, anything that might shed light on the key players in that drama." "And what will you do?" "I shall visit Scotland Yard to examine their records on Edmund Sweetwater, and then make inquiries at the address in Covent Garden, where his business once stood. We need to establish whether Sweetwater is indeed our culprit, or if someone else might be using his methods." I departed for the British Library, spending most of the day poring over newspapers and medical journals from 3 years prior. What I discovered was a tragic tale of a once-respected business brought low by accusations that its products had sickened several children. The medical evidence had been inconclusive, but the public outcry, fueled by sensational reporting, had been overwhelming. I was particularly struck by the vehemence of one Dr. Philip Carmichael, who had led a committee of parents in demanding Sweetwater's business be closed. His letters to the editor had been especially damning, describing Sweetwater as a merchant of poison, masquerading as a purveyor of innocent pleasures, and calling for the severest penalties the law allows. When I returned to Baker Street in the late afternoon, I found Holmes already there, studying a large map of London that he had pinned to the wall. Coloured pins marked various locations. "Ah, Watson," he greeted me. "What did you discover?" I related my findings, particularly regarding Dr. Carmichael's campaign against Sweetwater. "Excellent work," Holmes nodded. "It corresponds with what I learned today. Sweetwater's business was indeed ruined by the scandal. He was forced to sell everything to cover his debts and legal costs. The last confirmed sighting of him was boarding a ship bound for America, though no record exists of his arrival there." "And what of the former premises?" I asked. "Now a haberdasher's shop with no trace of its former occupant." However, I did learn something of interest from a neighbouring shopkeeper. Sweetwater had a younger brother, Frederick, who worked with him in the business. After the scandal, this brother reportedly suffered a nervous collapse and was committed to an asylum in Sussex. He was released about a year ago, whereabouts now unknown. Holmes turned to the map, pointing to the pins. The red pins mark the locations where each child disappeared. The blue pins indicate the homes of the families who were most vocal in the campaign against Sweetwater. Observe the pattern, Watson. I studied the map and felt a chill run down my spine. The abductions are occurring in roughly the same areas where those families live. Precisely, Holmes replied grimly. I believe our Candyman is executing a carefully planned revenge against those he holds responsible for his downfall. The question now is it Edmund Sweetwater himself or someone acting on his behalf, perhaps his brother Frederick? As twilight descended upon London, Holmes and I found ourselves pondering this sinister conundrum. 6 children were missing, their whereabouts unknown, their safety uncertain. And somewhere in the great city, a man driven by vengeance was watching, waiting, and planning his next move. The suite and its threatening note lay in Holmes's desk drawer, a silent reminder that the clock was ticking and that our adversary would not hesitate to claim another innocent victim. Chapter 5. The Abandoned Factory. Morning broke cold and grey over London, a thin drizzle falling through the November fog as Holmes and I set forth on the next stage of our investigation. My friend had been awake before dawn, as was his habit when deeply engaged in a case, and I found him studying a series of documents spread across our breakfast table. I have been examining the records of property owned by the Sweetwater family, Holmes explained, as we settled into our hansom cab. Besides the main shop in Covent Garden, Edmund Sweetwater maintained a small factory on the south bank of the Thames near Rotherhithe. It was there that he produced his more elaborate confections, including, I suspect, the distinctive sugar compound we have encountered. And you believe this factory might hold some clue to the whereabouts of the missing children? I asked, pulling my coat tighter against the damp chill. It is a possibility we must explore, Holmes replied, his keen eyes scanning the misty streets as we rumbled through the city. The factory was not among the assets sold to cover Sweetwater's debts. It appears to have been owned through a separate company, a detail that may have been overlooked in the aftermath of the scandal. Our journey took us through progressively less salubrious neighbourhoods until we reached a dilapidated wharf area. The cab could proceed no further along the narrow, rutted lane that led to our destination, so we continued on foot, the Thames a leaden presence to our right, its surface wrinkled by the persistent drizzle. The abandoned factory stood at the end of the lane, a 3-story brick building with broken windows and a partially collapsed roof. A faded sign above the main entrance read S&S Confectionery Works, the paint peeling away to reveal the weathered wood beneath. S&S, I mused. Sweetwater and Sweetwater, the brothers. Indeed, Holmes nodded, approaching the padlocked main door with interest. He examined it closely, then straightened with a look of satisfaction. This lock has been used recently, Watson. Observe the lack of rust on the shackle and the fresh scratches around the keyhole. With deft movements, Holmes produced his set of lock-picking tools and set to work. Within moments, the padlock clicked open and we stepped into the gloomy interior of the building. The ground floor was largely empty, save for some broken machinery and empty crates. Dust lay thick upon the floor, yet I observed what Holmes had already noted, a series of footprints leading to and from a staircase at the far end of the room. "Someone has been here and recently," I whispered, instinctively keeping my voice low. Several times, Holmes agreed. Observe the multiple overlapping prints. Our quarry has been using this place as a base of operations. We ascended the creaking staircase to the first floor, which had once housed offices. Here, the signs of recent occupation were more evident. A desk had been cleared of dust, and upon it lay several newspapers, all open to articles about the missing children. A pot-bellied stove in the corner showed the remains of a recent fire, providing evidence that someone had sought warmth in this desolate place. Holmes examined everything with meticulous care, from the arrangement of the newspapers to the contents of the waste paper basket beside the desk. He seemed particularly interested in a series of small jars lined up on a shelf, each containing different coloured powders. "The ingredients for his special confections," Holmes murmured, carefully unstoppering one jar and sniffing its contents, including the South American herb I detected in our sample. But it was in a back room that we made our most disturbing discovery. The walls were covered with sketches and newspaper clippings, a macabre collage that documented the scandal that had ruined Sweetwater. Articles announcing the illness of children, editorials demanding investigation, and reports of the public health inquiry were interspersed with photographs of respectable-looking families. Several faces had been circled in red ink, and beneath each circled photograph was a child's name, written in the same meticulous hand as the threatening note Holmes had received. "These are the parents who testified against Sweetwater," Holmes said gravely, "and these are their children, our missing children." In the centre of this disturbing display was a larger clipping, an editorial written by Dr. Carmichael, calling for the severest penalties against the merchant of poison. Below it, in a hand, trembling with evident rage, were written the words, "They took everything from me. Now I take what is precious to them." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp November air. "This is the work of a madman, Holmes. A methodical madman," Holmes corrected, "which is the most dangerous kind." He moved to a table beneath the window where lay a leather-bound ledger. Opening it carefully, Holmes revealed page after page of notes, detailed observations of the daily routines of the families whose children had been taken. He watched them for weeks, Holmes said, leafing through the pages, learning their habits, identifying vulnerabilities, planning each abduction with precision. As Holmes turned another page, a folded paper slipped out and fell to the floor. I retrieved it and opened it to find a map of London, similar to the one Holmes had created at Baker Street, but with additional markings. "Holmes," I said urgently, "there are more locations marked here than the 6 children already taken." Holmes studied the map intently. He has targets selected for future abductions, and unless I am mistaken, the next one is planned for tomorrow. Before we could discuss this further, a loud crack echoed from below, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. "Down, Watson!" Holmes hissed, pulling me away from the window and toward the wall. No sooner had we moved than a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the window frame precisely where we had been standing. "It seems our presence has been detected," Holmes whispered. "We must exit with caution." And we made our way to the staircase, Holmes leading with his revolver drawn. The ground floor appeared empty, but as we neared the exit, a tripwire glinted in the dim light. A trap that would have brought a section of the ceiling down upon us had Holmes not spotted it. "Our adversary is as clever as he is determined," Holmes remarked, as we carefully stepped over the wire. He anticipated that we might discover this place. Outside, the rain had intensified, and the fog had thickened, providing cover as we made our way back to the main road. Only when we were safely in a cab heading back to Baker Street did I feel the tension begin to ease from my shoulders. "What now, Holmes?" I asked. "Should we inform Lestrade about the factory?" Holmes sat in thought, his angular profile outlined against the cab window. "Not yet, Watson. The factory has yielded valuable information, but I doubt our man is keeping the children there. It's too exposed, too obvious. No, he has another location, a place where he feels completely secure." "But how will we find it?" "By understanding our adversary," Holmes replied. "This is not merely about revenge, it is about justice perverted in his mind. He is righting a wrong done to him. The pattern of his actions, the meticulous planning, the symbolic use of sweets, these are the acts of a man who believes himself rightfully reclaiming what was taken." As our cab approached Baker Street, Holmes fell silent once more, his mind clearly racing along paths of deduction invisible to me. The rain beat a steady tattoo upon the roof of the cab, and I could not help but think of the 6 children held somewhere in the vast expanse of London by a man consumed with thoughts of vengeance. Chapter 6. The Bait is Set. The following morning found us closeted with Inspector Lestrade in our sitting room at Baker Street. The little detective's ferret-like face was drawn with concern as Holmes recounted our discoveries at the abandoned factory, though we had visited the place again with police reinforcements only to find it deserted, all evidence of occupation hastily removed. "So we are no closer to finding these children," Lestrade said with a note of frustration. 6 young lives hanging in the balance and the press becoming more demanding by the day. "On the contrary," Holmes replied, lighting his pipe with deliberate calm. "We are considerably closer. We know our man's methods, his motivation, and most importantly, his pattern. The map we discovered yesterday indicated that his next target would be in the vicinity of Regent's Park." "Then we should flood the area with constables," Lestrade suggested eagerly. Holmes shook his head. "That would merely cause him to delay or select another target. No, Inspector, we need a more subtle approach. We must set a trap." "A trap? What sort of trap?" "One with irresistible bait," Holmes answered, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light I had come to recognize as the harbinger of one of his more unorthodox strategies. An hour later, Lestrade having departed with instructions, Holmes outlined his plan to me. "Our quarry is methodical, Watson. He selects his victims with care, children of a certain age from families of a particular class, and importantly, children who would be susceptible to the offer of unusual sweets." "You're not suggesting we use an actual child as bait?" I asked, with alarm. Holmes smiled thinly. "Not precisely. I have in mind a role for one of my Baker Street irregulars, young Wiggins, who despite being 12 years of age can pass for younger when required, but he will not be unprotected." "How so?" "Because I shall be there myself, Watson, in a disguise that even you might not penetrate. I shall pose as a wealthy gentleman taking his son to the park, a father overly indulgent with his child, precisely the sort of mark our Candyman would find appealing." I frowned, unconvinced. "It seems a terrible risk, Holmes." "The greater risk would be to allow another child to be taken," he replied firmly. "Besides, Wiggins is as sharp as they come and has been well instructed. You and Lestrade will maintain a discreet surveillance from a distance. The moment our man makes his approach, we shall have him." The remainder of the day was spent in preparation. Holmes transformed himself with the skill of a master actor. Gone was the lean, hawk-like detective, and in his place stood a portly, red-faced gentleman with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of prosperous complacency. Young Wiggins, scrubbed clean and dressed in a velvet suit with a sailor collar, looked every inch the pampered son of privilege. "Remember, Wiggins," Holmes instructed the boy, "you are to accept any offer of sweets with enthusiasm, but insist that you must show them to your father first. Under no circumstances are you to go anywhere with the man or consume anything he gives you." "Right you are, Mr. Holmes," the street urchin replied with a wink that seemed incongruous with his fine attire. "I'll play the little gentleman perfect, just as you showed me." For 3 days, Holmes and Wiggins frequented the paths of Regent's Park, establishing a routine that any observer would note. Each afternoon at precisely 2 o'clock, they would appear, the father indulgently purchasing treats and toys for his son from the various vendors that lined the paths. Lestrade and I maintained our surveillance from separate vantage points, communicating via prearranged signals. It was on the 3rd day, as a watery sun struggled to penetrate the November fog, that I observed a change in the pattern of park visitors. A tall, slender man in a dark greatcoat had taken up position near a stand of leafless elms, his attention seemingly fixed on a book he held, but repeatedly drifting toward Holmes and Wiggins. Using the small field glass Holmes had provided, I studied the stranger. His face was partially obscured by a scarf and the brim of his hat, but there was something in his bearing, a coiled tension, that put me instantly on alert. I gave the signal to Lestrade, who had noticed the same individual from his position near the park gates. Holmes, playing his role to perfection, appeared oblivious to the scrutiny, fussing over Wiggins and consulting his pocket watch with theatrical impatience, as if awaiting someone. "Run along and play by the pond for 10 minutes, Edward," he called to Wiggins in a voice quite unlike his own. "Your aunt will be here shortly, and you know how she dislikes to be kept waiting." Wiggins skipped off toward the duck pond, artfully straying closer to the stand of elms where the stranger lurked. I tensed, my hand moving to the revolver in my pocket, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, as if making a sudden decision, the stranger closed his book and approached Wiggins, who was now throwing crumbs to the ducks. I could not hear their exchange, but I saw the man reach into his pocket and produce what appeared to be a small, brightly wrapped package. Wiggins, true to his instructions, took the offering with apparent delight, but then pointed toward Holmes, saying something that caused the stranger to stiffen. For a moment I feared he might grab the boy and flee, but instead he seemed to reconsider, nodding slightly before accompanying Wiggins back toward Holmes. I moved closer, careful to maintain my disguise as an elderly gentleman feeding the birds, while Lestrade similarly adjusted his position. "Father, look what the kind gentleman has given me," Wiggins called out with perfect, childish enthusiasm. "He says they're special sweets that change flavour as you eat them." Holmes turned, his expression shifting from benign indulgence to sharp interest. "Indeed? How very generous. And you are, sir?" The stranger hesitated, and for a moment I thought he had recognized Holmes despite the disguise. But then he smiled, a thin, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "Simply a confectioner with a new product, eager for the opinions of young connoisseurs," he replied in a cultured voice. "I find children's palates are often more discerning than adult." "Fascinating," Holmes said, extending his hand. "I am Richard Blackwood, and this is my son Edward. Perhaps you would care to join us for tea? My sister will be arriving shortly, and she has a particular interest in confectionery." Again that moment of hesitation, of calculation in the stranger's eyes. Then he shook Holmes's proffered hand. "You are most kind, Mr. Blackwood, but I have other appointments. Perhaps another day." With a slight bow, he turned and walked briskly away, disappearing into the foggy park before either Lestrade or I could intercept him without revealing ourselves. Later, back at Baker Street, Holmes examined the wrapped sweet with intense concentration. "It is, as I suspected," he said at length, "the same distinctive compound, with the addition of a sedative that would render a child docile and compliant within minutes of consumption." "But we've lost him, Holmes," I said, with disappointment. "He was suspicious and did not take the bait." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a strange light. On the contrary, my dear Watson, he took the bait most thoroughly, for you see, when we shook hands, I managed to place a small dab of adhesive on his glove, an adhesive of my own creation that contains a chemical tracer. Invisible to the naked eye, but under ultraviolet light, it glows with a distinctive blue hue and will remain on anything he touches for several hours. You mean? Yes, Watson, our fox has unwittingly led us to his den. Even now, Wiggins and the other irregulars are following the trail through London. By nightfall, we shall know where he has taken those children, and then, my friend, the true game begins. As darkness settled over London, I could not help but wonder what scene would greet us when we finally confronted the man who had brought such terror to the families of the missing children. Little did I realize that the most dangerous and revealing part of our investigation was yet to come. Chapter 7. The Face of the Enemy. It was near midnight when a sharp rapping at our door announced the return of young Wiggins. The boy's face was flushed with excitement despite the biting cold of the November night, and he could scarcely contain himself as he burst into our sitting room. "We've found him, Mr. Holmes!" he exclaimed, pulling off his cap and warming his hands at the fire. "Just as you said we would." Holmes, who had been pacing restlessly for the past hour, his pipe sending clouds of blue smoke toward the ceiling, turned with evident satisfaction. "Well done, Wiggins! What have you discovered?" "He led us a proper chase, sir," the boy replied, accepting the cup of hot tea that I pressed into his hands. "Through Marylebone and St. John's Wood, then doubling back toward Camden Town. He's holed up in an old townhouse on Thornhill Road, a big place with boarded windows and a high wall around the garden." "Did you see anyone else enter or leave the premises?" Holmes inquired. "No, sir, but there's a light in an upper window, and I heard what sounded like a child crying when I crept close to the garden wall." Holmes exchanged a significant glance with me. "It appears we have found our quarry's lair, Watson. Wiggins, you have done excellent work. Now I want you to take this note to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard." He scribbled a few lines on a sheet of paper, folded it, and handed it to the boy along with a half-sovereign. "Make haste, but be careful." After Wiggins had departed, Holmes moved to his bedroom and began to change his attire. "We cannot wait for Lestrade and his men, Watson," he called over his shoulder. "Our man is clearly on alert after today's encounter. He may move the children, or worse, if he suspects he is being pursued." "What do you propose?" I asked, already reaching for my revolver. "A reconnaissance for now," Holmes replied, emerging in dark clothing suitable for the night's work. "We need to ascertain the layout of the house and the precise location of the children before we attempt a rescue." A quarter of an hour later, we stood in the shadow of a large elm tree opposite the house Wiggins had identified. It was an imposing structure, once grand, but now fallen into disrepair, its facade darkened with soot and its front garden overgrown. As Wiggins had reported, most windows were boarded, but a faint glow emanated from a small window on the top floor. "The servants' quarters," Holmes murmured. "An excellent place to conceal prisoners, isolated from the street and unlikely to attract attention." We crossed the road and made our way along the wall surrounding the property until we reached a point where ivy had grown thick enough to provide potential handholds. "I shall go over first," Holmes whispered. "If all is clear, I will signal for you to follow." With the agility of a cat, Holmes scaled the wall and disappeared over the top. Moments later, his low whistle indicated that I should join him. I found the climb considerably more challenging than my friend had made it appear, but soon we were both crouched in the overgrown garden, listening intently for any sound that might betray a watchman or guard dog. The house loomed before us, a black silhouette against the night sky. Holmes pointed to a cellar door partially concealed by untrimmed shrubbery. "That will be our entry point," he whispered. "Follow closely and tread lightly." The door yielded to Holmes's skilled manipulation of a lock-pick, and we found ourselves in a damp, musty cellar that appeared to serve as a storeroom. By the light of Holmes's dark lantern, we navigated through stacked crates and discarded furniture toward a staircase leading to the ground floor. As we ascended, a peculiar sweet scent became increasingly noticeable, the same distinctive aroma I had detected in the confectionery samples Holmes had examined. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of settling timbers and the distant sound of wind rattling a loose shutter. We moved cautiously through the ground floor, which contained rooms stripped of furnishings and thick with dust, showing no signs of recent habitation. A broader staircase led us to the first floor, where we discovered evidence of occupation, a sitting room with a chair and reading lamp, and what appeared to be a small laboratory with equipment for the manufacturing of confectionery. Holmes examined the apparatus with interest. "Our man has been busy recreating Sweetwater's special recipes," he whispered. "Note the distinctive copper pans and specialized thermometers." A sound from above, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard, drew our attention. Holmes immediately extinguished his lantern, and we stood frozen in the darkness, scarcely daring to breathe. Footsteps moved across the ceiling, then descended a rear staircase that we had not yet discovered. Holmes pulled me into the shadow of a large cabinet as a door at the far end of the corridor opened, admitting a tall, slender figure carrying a lamp. In its illumination, I recognized the man from the park, though he had removed his hat and scarf. His features were sharp, his complexion pale, and his dark hair receding from a high forehead. He moved with precise, careful steps toward the laboratory, unaware of our presence. Once inside, he began measuring ingredients with fastidious attention to detail, consulting a leather-bound notebook as he worked. Holmes and I watched through the partially open door as he heated a copper pan over a spirit lamp, stirring its contents with a wooden spoon. "He's preparing another batch of his special sweets," Holmes breathed in my ear, his voice so low I could barely hear it. No doubt intended for his next victim? Before we could decide on our next move, a sound from upstairs interrupted the silence, a child's plaintive call, followed by another, then a chorus of young voices. The man's head jerked up, his face contorting with annoyance. He set down his implements, wiped his hands meticulously on a cloth, and made his way back toward the rear staircase. "Now, Watson," Holmes whispered urgently, "we must see where he goes. The children are clearly being held upstairs." We followed at a careful distance as the man ascended the narrow back stairs to the top floor of the house. Here, the once grand residence had been divided into smaller chambers, presumably servants' quarters from a more prosperous era. The man unlocked a door with a key from his waistcoat pocket and entered one of these rooms. Holmes and I crept forward until we could peer through the partially open door. What we saw caused my blood to run cold. The room had been converted into a makeshift dormitory with 6 small beds arranged along the walls. In each bed was a child, looking pale but apparently unharmed. They were not bound, but seemed strangely lethargic, their movements slow and their eyes unfocused. "Silence," the man was saying, his cultured voice now harsh with irritation. "You will have your sweets in the morning if you behave, but no more tonight. The formula makes you too excitable before bedtime." "I want to go home," a small girl whimpered. Emily Thornfield, I realized with a start, recognizing her from the photograph her mother had shown us. "Home?" the man repeated, his tones suddenly venomous. "You shall never go home. Your parents took everything from me, and now I have taken you from them. That is justice." As he turned to leave the room, his face came fully into the light, and Holmes drew in a sharp breath. "Frederick Sweetwater," he murmured, "not Edmund." The sound, slight as it was, caught the kidnapper's attention. His head snapped toward the door, his eyes widening as they met Holmes's gaze. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then, with remarkable swiftness, Sweetwater slammed and locked the door to the children's room and bolted down the corridor toward another staircase. "After him, Watson!" Holmes cried, abandoning stealth for pursuit. "We cannot let him escape." We gave chase through the darkened house, following the sound of Sweetwater's footsteps and the occasional crash as he knocked objects aside in his flight. I caught a glimpse of him descending toward the ground floor, his face a mask of desperate fury in the moonlight that streamed through a broken shutter. Little did we know that the confrontation awaiting us would reveal the full extent of the Candyman's madness and push Holmes to the very limits of his remarkable abilities. Chapter 8. The Candyman's Confession. Our pursuit of Frederick Sweetwater led us through the warren-like corridors of the old house, down a servant's staircase, and finally into what had once been a grand exhibition room. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, casting elongated shadows across the dusty floor. In the center of the room stood our quarry, his back to an ornate fireplace, his breathing ragged from the chase. "It is over, Sweetwater," Holmes declared, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The house is surrounded by Scotland Yard. There is no escape." This was, I knew, a calculated falsehood. Lestrade and his men could not possibly have arrived yet, but Holmes was playing for time. Sweetwater's thin lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said with a slight bow, "I should have recognized you in the park, despite your admirable disguise." "The great detective pursuing the humble confectioner?" "There is nothing humble about kidnapping 6 innocent children," I interjected, unable to contain my indignation. "Innocent?" Sweetwater spat the word as if it were poison. "They are the spawn of those who destroyed my brother, destroyed our family name, our legacy, our art." Holmes took a step forward, his keen eyes never leaving Sweetwater's face. "Your brother, Edmund, was accused of using tainted ingredients that made children ill. The evidence was inconclusive, yet the public uproar ruined him." "Inconclusive?" Sweetwater laughed bitterly. "It was fabricated. There was nothing wrong with Edmund's confections. Nothing. Dr. Carmichael and his committee of so-called concerned parents was simply seeking a scapegoat for their children's common ailments. They chose Edmund because he had refused to sell his business to Carmichael's brother-in-law, who coveted our secret recipes." Holmes nodded slowly. "So you believe it was a conspiracy to ruin your brother and acquire his business?" "I do not merely believe it, I know it." Sweetwater's voice rose with emotion. "I found the letters, the agreements. Edmund discovered them too late. By then, his reputation was destroyed, his spirit broken. He took his own life on the voyage to America, Mr. Holmes. Did you know that? He never arrived because he threw himself into the Atlantic rather than live with the shame they had heaped upon him." I saw a flash of genuine sympathy cross Holmes's face, but his voice remained firm. "Even if what you say is true, Sweetwater, it does not justify taking revenge upon innocent children." "They are not harmed," Sweetwater insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the upper floors. "I have cared for them, fed them, given them the finest sweets any child could desire. They are merely guests." "Prisoners?" Holmes corrected, "drugged with your special formula to keep them compliant." Sweetwater's face darkened. "A mild sedative only, nothing harmful. I am not a monster, Mr. Holmes. I merely sought justice, to make those parents feel what Edmund felt, to have everything precious taken away." "And what was your end game?" Holmes asked, taking another careful step forward. "Surely you realized you could not keep the children indefinitely." A shadow crossed Sweetwater's face. "I had not thought that far ahead. Perhaps I would have released them eventually. Perhaps not. Each day their parents suffered was a small payment toward the debt they owed Edmund." As he spoke, I noticed his right hand moving slowly toward his pocket. Holmes, ever vigilant, had observed the same movement. "I would advise against any rash action, Sweetwater," Holmes warned. "Dr. Watson is an excellent shot, and unlike yourself, he has already drawn his weapon." Indeed, I had silently removed my revolver and now held it trained upon the confectioner. Sweetwater hesitated, then withdrew his hand empty. "You misunderstand me, Mr. Holmes. I am not a violent man. I was merely reaching for this." Slowly, he produced a small vial from his waistcoat pocket. A concentrated version of my special formula, quite lethal in this dosage. I had prepared it for myself, should my plans be discovered. "That would be the final injustice to your brother's memory," Holmes said quietly. "To leave his true story untold. If what you say about Carmichael and the others is true, then the courts should hear it. Your brother's name might yet be cleared." A flicker of hope crossed Sweetwater's haggard features, quickly replaced by skepticism. "The courts? They would never believe me over respectable men like Carmichael." "They might, with the proper evidence," Holmes replied. "These letters you mentioned, do you still have them?" "Of course. They are Edmund's vindication. I keep them always with me." Sweetwater tapped his breast pocket. "Then surrender yourself now. Give the children back to their families. And I give you my word that I will personally investigate your claims against Carmichael and his associates." For a long moment, the room was silent, save for the distant sound of wind rattling the window panes. I could see the conflict playing across Sweetwater's face, the desire for continued revenge warring with the hope of rehabilitation for his brother's memory. At that precise moment, the sound of police whistles filled the air, followed by the pounding of boots upon the front steps of the house. "Lestrade has arrived," Holmes announced. "Your decision must be made now, Sweetwater." With a gesture of defeat, Sweetwater placed the vial on the mantelpiece and raised his hands. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I will trust in your reputation for justice. The children are unharmed. The key to their room is in my left pocket." Holmes stepped forward and carefully retrieved the key. "A wise decision. Watson, would you escort our guest to Inspector Lestrade while I attend to the children?" As I led Sweetwater toward the front of the house, he turned to me with a strange, sad smile. "You know, Doctor, my special formula truly is remarkable, the perfect sweet. It changes flavor as it dissolves, revealing new tastes with each moment. Edmund was a genius in his way. That, at least, should not be forgotten." Lestrade and his men took custody of Sweetwater, while Holmes and I, assisted by a police surgeon, tended to the children. As Sweetwater had claimed, they were physically unharmed, though somewhat disoriented, from the mild sedative in the sweets they had been fed. By morning, all 6 had been reunited with their overjoyed families. 2 weeks later, as we sat by the fire at Baker Street, Holmes handed me a newspaper with a satisfied expression. "It seems Sweetwater's accusations had merit after all, Watson. Carmichael has been arrested for conspiracy and fraud. Several of his associates have confessed to fabricating evidence against Edmund Sweetwater as part of a scheme to acquire his business and recipes." "And some good has come of this affair," I remarked, "though at a terrible cost." "Indeed," Holmes nodded gravely. 6 families have endured unimaginable anguish, and those children will carry this experience with them always. I'm told that young Emily Thornfield now becomes hysterical at the mere sight of confectionery. And Sweetwater? He will serve a reduced sentence in light of the circumstances and his cooperation. His testimony was instrumental in exposing Carmichael's conspiracy. Edmund's name has been posthumously cleared, which seems to give Frederick more comfort than any revenge could have provided. Holmes fell silent, staring into the dancing flames of our hearth, his angular profile etched against the firelight. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice soft with an unusual note of reflection. "You know, Watson, this case reminds us that the most dangerous adversaries are not always those driven by base criminality, but those who believe utterly in the righteousness of their cause. Sweetwater sought justice for his brother in the only way he knew how, misguided though it was." "A lesson for us all," I agreed, "that even the sweetest exterior may conceal a bitter truth." Holmes smiled faintly at my inadvertent pun and reached for his violin. As the first notes of a melancholy air filled our sitting room, I reflected on the case of the Candyman's curse, a mystery solved, yet leaving behind the bittersweet knowledge that justice and vengeance are sometimes separated by the thinnest of lines. Thanks for joining us for the Candyman's Curse. If you enjoyed this Holmes mystery, hit subscribe for more stories every day. This is Alfie, signing off from Cafe Stories.